Welcome to Roar Like the Lamb. Father Sam Kachuba.
And I'm Paola Peña.
Oh, we're gonna have fun today. So much fun.
We have a lot to say, apparently.
Well, we're gonna have things to say. But I think this is an important moment for us to talk about. Now, of course, by the time this thing actually goes to air, it
might have died down.
It will have, I think, calmed down a little bit. But that's sort of the fun of it, is that we've had now a week to think a little bit, to pray a little bit. And then by the time this comes out, this might be a little bit of a muted thing, but that's okay. I still want to record it anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll even rearrange the release date.
That's fine.
And put this one up a little bit sooner.
That might make sense.
Yeah, we might do that. Well, we'll make that decision. And if it sounds like this is going to come out weeks from now, and it's actually not, then whatever.
Yeah.
Who cares?
So what are we talking about?
Paola, my friend. Today we are going to talk about a current event issue.
Sorry, my shoe really squeaked.
That was a really loud squeak. Yeah. It's like, how did that happen?
The outdoor grass is wet.
Are those new shoes?
No, they're old.
Oh,
but
okay.
They're just absorbing water.
So we're going to talk about a current events issue in the life of the church.
Yeah.
And that current events issue surrounds the Mass, and in particular, the use of the 1962 Roman Missal, commonly called the extraordinary form, or the usus antiquior, or the traditional Latin Mass, depending on how you like to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because on July 16th, Pope Francis issued a motu proprio called Traditionis Custodes, in which he curtailed, restricted, however you want to talk about it, the use of the Roman Missal, giving some specific parameters in which it can be used, but always with the bishop's permission. Whereas before, according to a motu proprio of Pope Benedict XVI, any priest anywhere had the freedom to celebrate it himself, at least privately, or for the good of a group of the faithful. With the understanding that it should not be something imposed on parishes or on communities, but rather there should be a group of people who actually ask for it in order for it to be offered. So this motu proprio is kind of a big deal, because it undoes a lot of the things that Pope Benedict had implemented.
When did Pope Benedict's motu proprio?
2007. Summorum Pontificum came out in 2007. So 14 years later, we get this motu proprio from Pope Francis. Now, a motu proprio, let's talk about that. Do you know what a motu proprio is?
Motor. Proper motor.
Okay, very close. All right, so
I was just playing around.
Yeah, so proper.
Okay.
Meaning like to itself.
Yeah.
Right, and motor, like movement. So a motu
proper
proprio
order of movement
is of my own will.
Oh.
Of my own movement, of my own decision.
Oh, okay.
So a motu proprio is an autonomous intervention of the Supreme Pontiff in the life of the Catholic Church.
Organized authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So typically, now, and this is an interesting thing, all right? If you read Traditionis Custodes, and it's a tough document to read. Like, the tone of it is very tough. And to give just the honest, this is editorial, this isn't objective, this is my own editorial opinion. It's way too harsh. It is unfair, and it doesn't really make sense. We'll talk about some of why it's too harsh and why it doesn't really make sense in a minute. But reading it, you see typically a motu proprio is granting permission for something, or is establishing something for the life of the church. And it's not usually restrictive in this way. If it is something restrictive, it's meaning that this thing has ceased to fulfill its purpose, and so we're going to change it to be something else now. So, for example, you could have a congregation in the Roman Curia that has typically had this capacity or this oversight, and now that need is no longer there, this particular group within the Roman Curia is going to be reestablished to now deal with this issue instead. So it's just sort of redirecting something. It's not really
the image that I had. It's like putting out a fire where there isn't a fire.
Yeah, and in fact,
that's how I felt. The letter was like, here we are going to rush into something and try to put something out, but there's no deadly fire.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my reaction.
Basically, I think what's happened is that there's an impression out there that something is happening that isn't happening.
Yeah.
And so the Pope is trying to address what isn't happening, thinking that it is happening. And so there's something that's amiss here. Anyway, very basically, and to maybe overly simplify the motu proprio, Pope Francis has said that any priest who wishes to celebrate the Mass according to the 1962 Missal. That is the Missal that was last edited prior to the Second Vatican Council. Any priest who wishes to celebrate Mass according to that old form, in that traditional form, must have his bishop's explicit permission, whereas Benedict had said that any priest has that faculty automatically. So a priest must ask permission of his bishop, and that any place where it's being celebrated must have the permission of the bishop to continue offering that celebration, and that the bishop is to designate locations where the traditional Mass can be celebrated, but not in parish churches.
Yeah.
And that the bishop is the one who has the ultimate competency. Any newly ordained priests after July 16th must not only ask their bishop for permission to celebrate it, but their bishop must then notify Rome of his
intent,
of the request, not even of his intent. Well, excuse me, that's what it seems like right now. So there are some major questions. So, for example, for us in the United States, basically every church is a parish church. We don't have many chapels. We don't have many unused church buildings that are going to be able to be designated. In fact,
so many of them are closing down. All you have is.
We pretty much only have parish churches. There are some places where it could be done that wouldn't be a parish church, but there's a huge question. Well, why do this?
Right.
The attitude that the Holy Father seems to have is that those people who attend the extraordinary form, or those priests who celebrate it, are somehow divisive and reject Vatican II and are trying to set up a parallel true church. So
that's not to say that there aren't some people who are extremes in the church.
Yeah, of course.
And so, but that's not the majority of people.
We're always going to have certain things that are on the edges, right?
Yeah.
And there will always be certain people who might go really wild and crazy and claim certain things.
I think it's interesting because you're coming at this from a priest and I'm coming at this from as a layperson who, to clarify, like my first TLM, traditional Latin Mass, I think it was like 2011, and it was beautiful. I had no idea what was going on, but I recognized the beauty of it. Is it always like my preferred way of worship? No, like I'm going to speak as many people. Like, no, I recognize the beauty now, and I'll go when I can. I would prefer a solemn low Mass, but I mean that's where I am. But yet this letter was like, but why?
Yeah.
Why would you take it away?
And I think there's a lot more people who would feel that way, including priests.
Yeah.
So like you, I didn't have any real experience with the traditional Latin Mass until much more recently.
Yeah.
I was ordained right after Summorum Pontificum, but at the time that I was ordained, the seminaries hadn't had time yet to establish exactly how to teach it. So they were just starting to when I was ordained. And as a result, I chose not to take classes on it, not to learn that form just yet, because I said, I've got other things I need to worry about right now. Plus, I didn't know of any place where I might be assigned where it was going to be necessary that I know it. So I said, well, I have time. I can learn it eventually. And then as time went on, I started to realize I really do want to know how to do this.
Yeah.
I really, really do. And then we had a priest here who wanted to offer one because some people knew that he celebrated in the extraordinary form. And he asked, could we have one here? Because some people have asked. And I said, sure. So we did it as a special occasion, outside of a normal Mass schedule. And people liked it. And people asked for more opportunities. And that kind of became the real impetus for me to say, all right, I have to learn this now, because there's actually people from my parish who have asked if they could have the opportunity to see this, without having to go to a different town, without having to go to another parish. Could you have one here? And if there's some people who have asked for it, sure. And so we offered it every once in a while on a special feast. It wasn't even any part of the schedule. But then we started to realize that there was actually a group of people that would appreciate having it. So at the very least, on holy days of obligation, we were going to have one. And then the pandemic hit. And so just to get ourselves through the quarantine when we couldn't have Mass publicly, we started celebrating. We'd alternate days. One of us would celebrate the ordinary form Mass in the morning and live stream it, and then the other one would celebrate a low Mass, and the guy who celebrated the morning Mass would serve the low Mass for him in the extraordinary form. And it turned into something that both of us were really kind of enjoying doing on a personal level. So this is where, for the priest's personal good, to be able to celebrate it is really an important thing. But then there were other people saying, can you keep doing that for us once the restrictions are lifted?
Mm-hmm.
Can we continue to have this? I said, yeah, sure, but it's not going to be able to be in the middle of the day because there's too many things going on in parish life. So I'll tell you what, we'll set aside 2 evenings during the week and offer it. And if people want to come in, and honestly, only one of those evenings ever got real traction.
Mm-hmm.
Monday evening
got
real traction with people who wanted to come. The Thursday night, it was always a small group of people and never really grew very much. And then I got to the point where I realized after about a year experimenting with this that there's too much going on in the life of the parish, and it's not prudent for me to continue offering an extra mass on a Thursday evening when I've got so many other responsibilities.
Right.
So I said, we're going to stop offering it then. It'll just be on the Monday evenings and on holy days of obligation.
And on Monday it's Missa Cantata.
Right. Monday it's a sung mass, so there's a little bit extra. It's really beautiful. But the reading the motu proprio, I woke up on Thursday as a priest who did all the things that the church asked him to do, and it was considered perfectly in communion and nothing unusual. And I was doing stuff as a perfectly normal priest.
Right.
I happen to have an affinity for the extraordinary form, but that is not the norm here at the parish. The norm here at the parish is the ordinary form, and that's it. It's something that I personally like and that I'm grateful to be able to offer to people here at the parish. That's it. Like nothing. It's not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
And then on Friday morning, I woke up and the motu proprio was out, and I found out that I was divisive and a source of disunity, and that I denied Vatican II.
So that's how you received this.
That's how I received it. It was like, I don't deny why is the Pope saying that I deny Vatican II? It's not true. So there's a confusion here, and I'm hoping that there will be some clarity in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
Will there be something that explains what he means by certain things? I wrote my licentiate dissertation. Dissertation is not really the right word. I don't know exactly how else to describe it, but I wrote a very, very long paper about Vatican II as my final paper. I actually love the council. If anything, I want to see the documents of the council received and understood in a more profound way.
Right.
It's confusing to then find out that because I happen to like a liturgical expression that existed before the council, that makes me somehow divisive and a rejector of Vatican II. I'm not. I'm just not. That's not true.
What made me think this, so there's a priest in Louisiana that I follow online, and he mentioned himself, I'm not a traditional Latin Mass guy, and he's very good with his words, but he was like, but why take away a community that has learned how to experience God in this way? And I liked how he expressed that the Holy Spirit is diverse in the gifts that he gives. And there's many ways in which people experience the Lord, and some end up finding just deeper intimacy with Jesus in a traditional Latin Mass. Others, might just do Novus Ordo. And it got me thinking about how the church isn't just one, because there's a plurality that God allows in order for us to encounter him.
And one thing, I'm going to stop you there.
Theologically, always correct me. The church is one.
The church is one.
Yes, but many expressions are
correct.
That's what I meant to say.
Yes.
There's many expressions that are available. So, for example, we all just can't say we're all like Dominicans in terms of spirituality. Sure. We have Franciscans, we have Carmelites, Thomas. Like, we can't say, oh, well, the only way to be like a really good theologian or really glow in your faith is if you follow the way of Francis.
Right.
No.
Meaning Saint Francis.
Saint Francis, yeah. It's like that's not it. Like you need like the way the Jesuits, the way that Saint Ignatius put it out, like that for me, that's the best way that I was able to understand that okay, if we can have all these different spiritualities that exist in the church, is there space for that in terms of expression of worship?
Yeah.
So that's what if that's allowed, then what is going on here?
Yeah. Well, and there's always been a need in the life of the church for a certain cohesiveness and coherence in liturgical expression. So it is necessary for the church to regulate the liturgy.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody could possibly object to that idea.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense.
There's
like last thing we need is Coke and pizza on an altar,
right,
like they used to do in the 70s.
Exactly.
Gross.
There's also a need for uniformity in the liturgy. And so one of the expressions of the universality of the church is that the liturgy is the same in different places. And so there's not anything wrong with saying that we need to do this. Now, even if you look at the extraordinary form of the Mass, it's the 1962 Missal, which means that it's a Missal that has been gradually reformed since the Council of Trent.
Yes, yeah.
So over the course of 500 years, that missal was refined and reformed. It's true that at the Council of Trent, the other missals that had predated it, or other forms of celebrating, were gradually suppressed. You know, if these, and what the Council of Trent did was it said that if a form of liturgical expression lacked antiquity, meaning it had really come about only in the last, I think at that time, in the last 400 years. So if it was less than 400 years old, or less than 200 years old, whatever it was, they said, stop doing it. We're not going to use that form anymore. We're going to use this.
Interesting.
But they even the Council of Trent gave a period of time for that implementation to take place, so that people could gradually be introduced to a uniform celebration of the Mass in the Western Church, in the Roman rite of the Church. Other rites that had already existed were allowed to continue and still exist to this day.
Yeah, there's like 16
there are
or something,
multiple different rites. Then if you look at the East, in the Byzantine rites of the Church, there are these churches in union with Roman. I don't remember the number. I never remember this number. It's terrible. I should know.
I really do think it's the 16.
No. In
Oh.
the Eastern Rite.
Oh, the Eastern Rite.
The Eastern Rite, which are actually autonomous, or I think they call them autocephalous churches. So
That's a cool
they have
word.
they have their own bishops and everything else. Whereas in the other rites that are connected to the Roman Rite,
that's really cool.
Yeah, so the Ambrosian Rite, for example, and the Dominican Rite, these are rites of the Mass that are celebrated either in a particular religious community that is still under the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, or in particular places. So the Ambrosian Rite is celebrated in Milan, but it's not separate from the Roman Catholic Church.
That's
whereas
cool.
there are Eastern Catholic churches whose bishops are in union with the Holy Father in Rome, but they are not Roman.
Right.
So there's all these different liturgical rites, liturgical expressions. What we see then is this tremendous diversity of culture and things like that coming together, worshiping the true God, professing the same faith, but the multiplicity of expressions. So the 1962 Missal was one of those, probably the most dominant until the Second Vatican Council. After the Council, the new Missal issued after 1970 was intended as a reform of the 62 Missal, but there were a lot of people who remained very attached to that older form of celebrating Mass. So John Paul II, Benedict XVI, even Paul VI had granted permission for people to continue celebrating. Now, at first, that was indicated mostly towards priests, especially elderly priests, for whom learning the new Mass would have been something difficult.
Yeah.
You know, if you're 80 years old and now the new Mass is being promulgated, and you've got certain habits built up and you know how to do it, it could genuinely be challenging to learn that new Mass in your old age, you know, as your eyesight fails and everything. To try and learn a new way of celebrating Mass might really and truly be a difficulty. So it was meant to help those priests, but also to help the faithful who remained devoted and who wanted to continue celebrating a perfectly legitimate expression. That's why the Second Vatican Council and subsequent documents after the Council never abrogated or suppressed the Old Mass. So it was always a legitimate expression of the faith. John Paul II expanded the permission a little bit, Benedict XVI even more. Now, what happened in the intervening years is, especially after Benedict, after Pope Benedict XVI expanded the permission so that all priests could do it, there came this intrigue and interest in learning the Old Mass. Now, that intrigue and interest was not always perfect. You could have people who go, well, I'm allowed to, so I'm going to do it. And they start doing it without really having an adequate knowledge of, this is priests in particular, without having an adequate knowledge of Latin. You should know what you're saying. You know, for example, I can't celebrate Mass in Portuguese. It's not because I'm not allowed to. I am permitted to celebrate Mass in Portuguese, but I don't speak Portuguese. So it'd be a very bad idea for me to attempt to celebrate Mass in Portuguese.
Yeah.
I can't celebrate Mass in French. I can read some French.
Oui.
But I can't actually say the words correctly or comprehend exactly what I'm saying. I can say Mass in Spanish.
Yes, you can.
I definitely know how to do that, and I have done it. I've said Mass in Italian. I'm not sure if I would trust myself these days with saying Mass in Italian because my Italian is super rusty. But like, in other words, like, I'm allowed to say Mass in these other languages, but I shouldn't say Mass in a language that I don't know.
Right.
So in the same way, like, I shouldn't say Mass in Latin if my knowledge of Latin is not sufficient. Now, truth be told, I can't speak Latin the way that I can speak Spanish or Italian. but I can understand enough of it, and I do know what I'm saying when I say Mass in Latin.
So with all of this, what do you think are the spiritual implications of this for, I mean, I guess the church as a whole as one, but also like for the individual?
The immediate spiritual implication is confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately is the sense of, why is this being done? Why was this decision made? The question then of, does the Pope really think this poorly of me? And I think this applies not just to priests, but to people who have an affinity for the extraordinary form. Now, especially in a parish like this one, where someone might go to the extraordinary form and appreciate the opportunity to go to Mass, but that's not going to be their normal expression of faith, their normal expression of worship, nor is it their desire to worship exclusively in that way.
Yeah.
They're grateful maybe for the opportunity to go.
Right. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think most people have the idea that this is a nice thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
And especially on a special occasion,
right.
It would be nice to be able to go and do this. Hey, this is kind of cool. This is a neat experience. It helps me feel like I'm connected to something that's very ancient. But beyond that, I don't feel like I need to do this all the time. There's other people who would say this is the only thing that we should be doing forever and ever and ever. And that might be a little bit more on the far extreme. And that's not always the best attitude. On the other hand, there are people who say this should never be done. It's terrible, and it's an imposition.
It's a whole spectrum of people.
Yeah, I had somebody say, "Why are you making people do this?" The very first time we offered a Latin Mass,
I remember,
in the traditional form, and I said, "I'm not making people do this.
It's an opportunity."
And she said, "Well, you're putting it on the calendar." I said, "Well, it's a Thursday night, and there's nothing else going on that night. There's literally nothing on the calendar. This is an opportunity. You don't have to come if you don't want to. In fact, if you don't want to come, that's okay, and nothing is held against you. This is an opportunity to celebrate a special feast day. It was the Feast of Corpus Christi. Now, by doing it, there was no missing out on Corpus Christi either, because in the extraordinary form, Corpus Christi happens on a Thursday. In the ordinary form, it happens on Sunday. And so we were going to celebrate it on both days. So either way, this person would get Corpus Christi and have the opportunity to celebrate it liturgically. It's just we were going to offer a Mass on a Thursday evening and say, hey, if you want to come, you can. And there was this visceral sort of, no, that's bad.
And then you wonder then, usually it's people who had grown up as a child with the TLM.
Yeah.
And then with the change, it's like, well, why are we going back? We're going backwards in terms of like God or freedom. But
this isn't a going backwards. No.
Right.
And that's never been the attitude, at least for me.
No, but it's been communicated to, I would say, that generation.
Sure.
You know, and so like that, I'm just assuming here, I've got some assumptions, but that's what I would hear, like, well, why are we going back? As if what was back then was bad.
Yeah. And part of the problem is a failure to understand what the council actually called for and what the rubrics, the actual instructions for the new Mass call for.
Yeah.
If you look at what Vatican II said about the liturgy in Sacrosanctum Concilium, it talks about the importance of things like Gregorian chant, and that the people should know how to say at least the proper parts of the Mass in Latin. That these are things that should be taught, and that Latin remains the language of the Roman Rite.
Yeah.
It can be translated, and certain things can be done in the vernacular. The Second Vatican Council's document on the liturgy never envisioned that everything in Mass would be in the vernacular. And then if you read in the actual general instruction of the Roman Missal, it talks about the choices for music, and it talks about things that should be done in a certain way, and it highlights the importance of Gregorian chant. It highlights the importance of people being able to do this. But you have so many folks who, in their younger years, in the years right after the council, were told that the church had abolished Latin, and that no more would the church be doing anything using the Latin language, and Gregorian chant was out completely. So either they were given poor information by people who didn't understand, or somebody deliberately lied to them.
Which happened, though.
Yeah, those are really the only possibilities. Either people were given bad information by well-meaning individuals, which I hope is what happened, or they were maliciously lied to about what the council actually said, and then prevented from doing their own research to learn it because trusted sources told them, well, the church doesn't want us doing this anymore. In fact, the church has always been encouraging us to use Gregorian chant.
That's what scandalized me when a friend of mine was entering religious life, and we were having a conversation because everybody kept throwing around the word Vatican II, and I had just kind of like reverted back, and I'm like, I don't understand why does everybody keep talking about Vatican II? I don't get it. And she had mentioned how even religious communities did not read the document themselves, but hired somebody else to read it. And what was given back to them, like, oh, we could do whatever we want. There goes away the habit. There
Right.
goes like all these other
Right, but
things.
if you read the documents
It
are
did
actually
say
calling
any
for this tremendous renewal and an
right.
appreciation of the liturgy and what the sacrifice of the mass is. The documents called for the, I mean,
It was seen in such through the earthly lens.
oh yeah, if you want to understand Vatican II, you have to read Lumen Gentium.
Yeah.
Like that's the interpretive key for all of the Second Vatican Council is in the document Lumen Gentium. It's powerful, it's beautiful, and right at the heart of that is the idea of the universal call to holiness.
Mm-hmm.
It was meant to be a moment of spiritual renewal in the life of the church. The visible change that came after Vatican II was, in fact, in the liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
Because with a desire to reform and renew the liturgy, there was this new rite that was promulgated. And so the most visible thing that we saw was in the liturgy. And lex orandi, lex credendi, the law of prayer is the law of faith. Then what you see happening liturgically, the way that we pray, is going to start to influence the way that we believe things. And so unfortunately, certain things were being done liturgically that actually the council never called for, nor did the Missal call for, nor did the 1970 Missal call for. So the new Mass did not call for a lot of these different things that were done in this sort of crazy spirit of experimentation. But there were people who were saying, no, anything that is old, anything that comes before the council has to be completely obliterated and wiped out of our history. It was the first cancel culture moment.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And there's this desire we just have to get rid of it because it's bad. But there was no real explanation for why it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we've come to this point of at least in my experience. So take that for what it's worth. But my experience with the extraordinary form has been that since 2007 and Pope Benedict XVI's motu proprio sumorum pontificum, there has been a growing interest in the extraordinary form of the Mass and the traditional Latin Mass, never in a way that's an imposition. At least, again, my experience, my personal experience.
Unless you're talking to the right people who are imposing it. But
right.
Other than that, most of the time it's not.
No, most of the time it's something that's offered.
Yeah.
Here, I'm going to celebrate this. Or there's people who have come and said, would you do this? And so priests offer it. It doesn't take the place of parochial masses or other celebrations. And it doesn't come in any way that's any different from the way other language masses come in. So if, for example, there's a large population of Spanish speakers that have moved into an area, eventually a parish is going to realize we need to offer a Mass in Spanish for them. And so it might feel to a parish that's changing, that the neighborhood is changing, and all of a sudden now we have Mass in Spanish and I lost my preferred English Mass. But the reason for it is that there's people who need this. It's a pastoral response. And so to recognize a pastoral response, we're going to do this because it's going to help you to pray. It's going to help you to grow. Well, in the same way, offering the traditional Latin Mass has been far more often a pastoral response and a pastoral invitation to say, come and experience something. And actually the traditional Mass in parishes that do have multiple languages, the traditional Mass has been a source of unity. Because the traditional Mass was the thing that brought together the Spanish-speaking community, the English-speaking community, whatever other communities you might have there. It brought them all together because it leveled the playing field. The Mass was not in any one person's language. It was offered for everyone. And then the homily could easily be done in both languages or more than two languages. It might make the homily really long, so you got to think really carefully about how you're going to speak and what you're going to say. But in other words, my experience, and I think this is the general experience far more than the negative stuff that the Pope was talking about. I think far more the experience has been that it's something that's offered. And it's something that people can decide, yes, I like that, or no, I don't. There's no shortage of masses in the ordinary form. There's no shortage of masses in the vernacular that people can go to. And there's no shortage of places where they can do that, including in the very places where the extraordinary form might also be offered. In most places, a Mass in the extraordinary form is something extra to the schedule, not the only thing. And so if it's something that is extra, that means it's been added on. It's a nice thing to have. And that's it. You don't have to worry about anything else. This is something in addition to our regular schedule of masses. Where this document hurts is that it suggests that people who might want to attend this or have that desire are somehow wrong for wanting that.
Yeah.
are somehow bad for wanting that. And I think we've got to be really careful with that. That's not the case. And I think it's unnecessarily hurtful. It also kind of assumes that it's always groups that have this mass, not that it's something that's offered that people just decide that they want to go. They decide they just want to go and experience it. Like, I don't have to belong to a group in order to go there. But the presumption that I must identify with a group, well, the very thing that we're trying to do in this motu proprio, according to Pope Francis, is to create unity. And as soon as you suggest that you belong to this group, that separates you from everybody else. Now you're identified with this group. So that's divisive right there. So there are flaws in the way that this document is written. Now, the Pope has the authority. Let me make very clear. The Pope has the authority to legislate in these matters. And so in obedience, I've submitted my request for permission to continue celebrating the 1962 Missal. I've submitted a request to the bishop to be allowed to do this and received permission, at least on a temporary basis, to do so here at St. Pius. And I'm grateful for that. That's what you do. If that's the process, that's the process. I don't have a problem with that part. Like being told that I have to ask permission. Actually, that makes sense. I'm happy to be able to communicate with my bishop about those things. And I'm very grateful to our bishop here, Bishop Caggiano, for his response. I think he's really done a great job just responding and responding well.
So what do you think about this? Because I do notice that there's also a culture, a group culture that you can kind of identify. Okay, these people are that's what we call them, tradies. Like, that's the name, right? And then when you go to other, a mass that is not traditional, even that also has its own culture of people. So now I'm wondering how much of that then is he considering that divisive? I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
Well, he's sort of assuming that if you have an affinity for the extraordinary form, that you also reject Vatican II. And yes, there are people who have an affinity for the extraordinary form who reject Vatican II.
Yes.
There are also people who hate the extraordinary form, who reject the church's teaching on any number of important moral issues and important disciplinary issues.
Abortion and marriage, example.
So there's division on some of these issues, no matter what. The question would be, is this the way to solve it, or do you go in a little bit differently? Somebody was saying, I don't remember who it was who talked about this, but they said that this is maybe the first time that a motu proprio has been written in response to the combox on the internet. Because internet trolls will get on there and say all kinds of crazy things. And this whole document feels like a response to that. And not to the actual human beings who are sitting in the pew going to mass.
People who were unaware that there was an issue.
Exactly.
This is exactly. When did this come up? Why do we make this a thing? Now it's a thing.
Right. And so, like you said before, in a lot of ways, this is trying to put out a fire that isn't burning. The comparisons are numerous. The Cardinal Mueller wrote some questions about it, and he said the tone of the whole document feels like a misguided fire brigade that instead of trying to put out the house that's on fire, they go to the barn next door and try to put that out.
Exactly. See, look at that.
I said it's like trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer. There's such a thing as a proportional response to a real issue. And in defense of Traditionis Custodes, I am not a fan of this document at all. I think it's in general wrong. I think that there's a hugely misguided approach to this. But in defense of it, Pope Francis does point out some problems that do in fact exist. It's just that I think he exaggerates the importance of those problems or how widespread they are. The problems that he addresses can be addressed and need to be addressed, but they would best be addressed by saying to the bishops of the world, gentlemen, look and see that these problems are there and do what you can to correct them, because we need to make sure that this doesn't become something that's divisive. Instead, it was, this exists everywhere, that the old mass is celebrated, and because of that, all of the people who do that are out of step with the church and out of communion with the church. And for the sake of unity, we're going to bring the hammer down on them. It doesn't help.
No.
That's the wrong approach.
No. And the thing too, it actually, in my opinion, it doesn't offer much of a solution either, because it's like, it seems like you're given permission at one point in the document, but then you're told, well, you have permission to do this, but except you just can't do that. So you're in this weird place where I actually can't do anything.
Right. What has been talked about a lot in the week since this document came out is the fact that it took effect immediately.
Right.
Typically, when a new law is given, even a state law, but forget a church law, even a state law has an effective date.
Yes.
So this law has been passed, and it's going to take effect on this date. And what that does is it gives time for the proper mechanisms to be established and put in place so that the law can be enforced, so that wherever training needs to be done, training can be done. Whatever forms need to be created can be created. Same thing in the life of the church. If a new law is going to go into effect, it's usually given a date. So at this time, this new law goes into effect, and that allows bishops, priests, laity the opportunity to prepare, to get ready. Like when the new
when the other mass when the
new translation of the mass came out in 2011,
so
the New English
much
translation came out. It was leading up to the first Sunday of Advent, but there was like almost a year of preparation and get ready because this is coming, and we had time to do catechesis, we had time to start talking about it, we had time to
get the little prints to put in the pews.
But that was really helpful because it helped people to make the adjustment and make the adjustment pretty quickly.
Right.
And so there was a time that was given before you start using this, start talking about this, explaining these different things.
Right.
This one takes immediate effect with
no guidance
on how these rules are supposed to be put into place. So the big question is, what about if the mass can't be celebrated in parish churches, then where?
But then you can't do it anywhere because you can't set aside a specific group for these masses.
Right. So there's a big question mark that really needs to be answered because that's unclear. Now, that could just be a lack of clarity.
That's possible.
It could just be that there's a lack of clarity about this. So what is the clarification?
So here's my question then. What is the proper response for a Catholic in return, to this document with what's going on in the world, in the church globally? Like what is our response with, like, how can I enter this charitably but also like obey my Lord in worship?
Right.
Right. And it's just a very interesting place to be in.
Absolutely. The proper response is always going to be obedience. Because when we are obedient to the church, when we're obedient to the Pope, to the bishops, what we're doing is we're exercising a virtue.
Yeah.
Obedience doesn't mean that I'm happy about everything. Obedience doesn't mean that I even fully understand everything. Obedience means that I trust, because the obedience that we give to, for example, as a priest, the obedience that I give to my bishop is really meant to be obedience to Christ.
Yeah.
So the vow of obedience taken by religious, the promise of obedience made by diocesan priests, this is something that's really meant to be obedience to Christ, and that Christ speaks through the person of my legitimate ecclesiastical superiors. Their job in calling me to obedience is to help me on the path to holiness.
Right. And Paul says this in Romans, like obedience leads to righteousness.
Right. And so when the church, which has legitimate spiritual authority over her children, so we who are baptized are children of Holy Mother, the Church.
Yeah.
And so when the church asks for something or tells us something, then the virtue of obedience to follow those rules, even if we don't fully grasp them or understand them, is the right starting point. Now, I can obey, and I have this motu proprio. I have requested permission from my bishop. I have done what I am supposed to do. And so in obedience to this motu proprio, I now have permission to celebrate the Mass because I've asked for it. In obedience to the motu proprio, I'm allowed to have the Mass here in the parish, at least temporarily, until we can get clarification on what does it mean that it can't be done in a parish church.
Yeah.
So obedience is the right response, because if I disregarded that, then I am acting outside of the life of the church. I'm setting myself up as the final arbiter of truth, justice, goodness, and beauty and everything else.
Right.
And I'm not. So obedience is always the first response. But then recognizing also, and at the same time, without any contradiction, that this is something that hurts. It hurts to read this. It's like the Pope doesn't like me. That's what it feels like. it hurts to see this happen. And there are good people, good priests, good lay people who I know who are really hurt by this and devastated by this and are wondering what the heck is happening. That's a wound inflicted on them by the institutional church, and unnecessarily so. It didn't need to happen this way.
No, of course, because it's not dealing with a moral issue.
Right. So this kind of thing
this is more like a behavior check, but a behavior that didn't need to be checked.
Right.
And it's interesting because, I'm asking, like, what is your response as a Catholic to this? Like, what should we be doing? And the church is still a human institution, which will come with its wounds. It'll in the same way that we might grow up in a family and we're just going to have unintentional wounds caused in our family, like it happens in the church as well.
Yeah.
And that's not to excuse like those extreme moments of like scandal and corruption, all of that. It's interesting how like just truly the state of brokenness exists because of our fallen nature. Like it is, we need to recognize. So for me, I'm really looking at this more from a bigger view of just the problem of sin, the problem of brokenness, the problem of the human condition. And like, really, we are in so much need of the Lord's mercy.
Yeah.
It's the only way that it's like, well, how can I still be, because you can kind of question like, why should I still be faithful? Like, honestly, like you're telling me I can't do this anymore. But to be faithful to Jesus, this is his church. And yet it's all its messes over the last 2,000 years. The Lord has still been faithful to the church.
Right. And when you look at the history of the church and you see those great reformers,
after some really bad seasons.
Right. and reformers, meaning those who really and genuinely sought the good of the church, they were always saints.
Yeah.
But they always exercised that virtue of obedience.
They did.
At the same time that they exercised the virtue of obedience, they were not afraid to speak the truth of what they saw as the problems plaguing the church.
Right.
And this is an important one to speak the truth about the real situation on the ground of how the 1962 Missal is celebrated. This is one where the Pope's motu proprio doesn't reflect, at the very least, my lived experience, but I know that I am not the only one who feels that way. And in fact, it's very clear from lots of the stuff that's coming out that most places don't experience it in this way. We recognize that there's that sort of population within those who might have an affinity for the 62 Missal to reject things, but by and large, that's not the case. Just as in your average parish, there might be a few people who are really kind of radical and think that everything that is traditional in the church needs to be destroyed. But by and large, that's not your average parishioner. Most people are like, I just want to be Catholic. I just want to pray. I just want to go to Mass.
Also, most people are super catechized. So like, well, they're getting there.
Not super catechized about certain things.
About certain things, yeah.
But you have in the very same way, like on one side, on the other side, you're going to have like the most.
You're always going to have
ultra
them.
extremes.
Yeah.
There's not much we can do.
No.
But we can do something when we see this to say, actually, the truth of the matter is more this way. The truth of the matter is more middle of the road. And I think that at the same time that we're being obedient, we can rightfully say this is the case. In most places where the 1962 Missal is celebrated, it's offered with reverence. It's to the spiritual benefit of both the people who attend and to the celebrant who's offering it. It has not led to the division or breakup of parishes. It has been a source of something good, a good experience for people.
Right.
And it has not prevented people who, for example, are not interested in it from having access to the sacraments.
Right.
There's still plenty of access to the sacraments for them. But this is also an opportunity to remind people of what the church really does do and what the church really does teach and what the liturgy really calls for, whether in the ordinary form or in the extraordinary form, to teach that, to catechize it, to give people a greater appreciation for the Mass. That's actually what's happening. That's actually what we can do. And so to say, in obedience, I will follow the rules here, but it's important to point out that some of these rules are seemingly arbitrary, unjust. I think it's okay to say that. I think it's safe. That's a safe thing to do.
I love that in the church, at least you have the freedom to ask these questions.
Yeah.
Like it's not just, you're not supposed to simply blindly follow everything.
Right.
That's why they have councils.
Right, but to ask those questions and to be honest, and then to await the response from the proper authority.
Yeah.
These are things we can do. Another thing, and this is, I think, at least as, if not more important than exercising the virtue of obedience, is to pray. In the end, what we have to do is pray. We pray for the Holy Spirit to guide the church. We pray for Pope Francis. We pray for those in authority, that they would have wisdom, that they would shepherd us rightly. We have to pray, and we have to pray for the people who are genuinely and sincerely interested in and attached to praying in the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite, because for them something very serious about their spiritual life has effectively been taken away, or at least it seemed that way a week ago.
Right.
Now there's a little better understanding, so we've breathed a little bit, and now we're able to see, oh, actually maybe it's not quite as bad as we thought. Nevertheless, it's not great.
We always have a knee-jerk reaction to news like that, and give us a couple of days and we think about it. I'm like, you know what? Okay, because that's what we all do.
Right. So this is now just a chance for us to pray, to redouble our efforts at prayer for the Pope, for the good of the church, for unity, and to examine our conscience. Right.
Yeah.
That's the last thing I'll say.
Yeah.
Like, this is a chance to examine the conscience.
I was going to say, there's just one scripture verse that's popping up in my head right now, and I think I'm going to butcher it, but essentially, like, be angry and just, but like, don't let it lead you to sin. So if it's
do not let the sun go down on your wrath.
Thank you.
The
right.
devil
So like
is prowling like a roaring lion, looking for
somebody
to devour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So also to be very aware of that, like we're entitled completely to our emotions, but it's our actions. Is it going to lead us towards like charity and
so
all of
this
that.
is a moment when you get a document from the church.
Yeah.
When the Pope speaks, when there's something there, it's good to read it, and it's good to reflect and say, is there something here that might need to be converted in my life? Is there some attitude that I have? So if the Pope is trying to correct something, I can very honestly read this and say, is there something here that I see in myself? I do not believe in creating a new parallel true church. I don't think that's what I'm doing. I don't have any of that. I absolutely do not reject Vatican II. So I know that that's not a problem for me. And I have no desire at all to create division or to drive people away. So that's not a problem for me. So I examine my conscience, and my conscience is very clean about my affinity for the extraordinary form, because also I think it's balanced by my affinity for the ordinary form. I do like celebrating Mass in the vernacular. I do. I wish that some of the bad habits liturgically that have been sort of imposed on parishes and on me from many years of not following the rubrics, I wish that I didn't have to feel like I was fighting to overcome them, or that every time I did something that was actually in accords with what the general instruction of the Roman Missal, what the rubrics of the Mass call for, I wish that I didn't feel like people were going to be mad at me and say that I was doing it wrong, even though I have the data to back it up. It's so funny. Like, I've shown people what the general instruction of the Roman Missal says. I've shown people what Sacrosanctum Concilium says about the Mass, and they say, yeah, but I don't like that. This is the church's authority actually teaching this and telling us what to do. I'm just doing what the church tells me. Yeah, but I don't like it. And so my taste is more important than whether or not you're doing what the well.
It's so funny. So as you're saying that, I'm thinking about something like, I don't think I've heard this in a while. Those like really gross hymns from the 70s.
Yeah.
Gather us in. It's like in my head right now. I'm like, I hate that song so much.
Good.
Like, there's some things that just need to go.
What's the Emperor in Star Wars say? Yes, feed your hatred. Like something. Like
I've never watched Star Wars, and I have no desire to ever watch Star Wars. No, unless it's Mandalorian, I'm only there for Baby Yoda.
Beautiful. There are certain things that have been done liturgically that are bad, and that's the case even in the extraordinary form too.
Yeah.
There are attitudes that can come with that we need to get rid of, and we need to purify. But
pride.
Yeah, it is.
It's pride.
But there's the fact is that this motu proprio that has just come out is like the opposite of helping to bring to conversion.
Yeah.
It's smacking people. I'm trying to remember. I think it was.
Did you read his letter?
I did, and his letter is just mean.
Oh, I didn't
The
even
letter
read
is mean.
Is it? Oh
Yeah.
man, I didn't read
The
it.
tone it's mean.
Oh, I thought it was
I
gonna,
wish it
because I thought it was
wasn't.
gonna explain it more.
No,
Oh,
it's just mean.
okay.
And that's very sad to me. Like Cardinal Mueller's thing was, the shepherd has hit the sheep with his staff.
My gosh, he's got really good analogies.
Yeah,
Just
but
really
it's painful when you see that, and so that's where I say we got to pray for the Pope. That's why it's so important, because he may genuinely not realize that this is the case.
Yeah.
He may be operating on bad information. I don't know. So we got to pray for him and pray that he's able to see this, and that he would receive what people are asking for, and receive it in the spirit that they're asking it. This isn't, when I say this, I don't say this as an opposition to him or to his authority, but rather as a Holy Father. This is something that has become important to me, and I don't understand why these restrictions have been put in place.
Right.
I would like help understanding. And I think that it's a mistake to put these restrictions in place, not again as a denial of papal authority, but just to say this doesn't make much sense to me. So that's kind of where I am right now. Again, I think this week has been helpful to just process and think about it a little bit more. And
rather than it being like a hot take.
Yeah, well, the hot take is usually a bad idea, although
it's good for clickbait, but it's not good in the long run.
Yeah, but in truth, a lot of the hot take stuff is here. It's just said more calmly than what I would have said if this was the day after. Right.
This is true.
Like, not much has changed in my reading of it.
Yeah.
It's just that I think I realized that it's not, in some ways, not as severe as I thought it would be, in that permissions are still available. But there is this lingering question of some of the lack of clarity in the document.
Right. Right.
There are some things that need to be answered, and we'll have to wait for those answers. And that's sometimes the challenge when a new law comes out for the church. Is how is this to be implemented, or what exactly does this mean? And we need to wait for that clarity. The rule of thumb in the life of the church is, when there is a lack of clarity about something, continue as you have been, waiting for a response.
That makes sense.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Well,
so obedience.
I
forgot what you said.
Not being afraid to, obedience to what the church teaches.
Right.
Obedience to what the Holy Father asks.
Obedience to
first.
Jesus.
Obedience to Jesus, ultimately.
Yeah.
Being willing to speak to that authority, to express concern, reservation, confusion.
Examination of conscience.
Personal examination of conscience.
Yep.
And prayer.
Yeah.
That's the solution. Yeah. Pray for the Pope. Pray for people who are struggling.
Yeah. Honestly, just pray for the church.
Just pray. Just pray.
Just pray.
Because real quick, we've only got like 2 minutes before I have to go. But this document comes out like hammering stuff. Let's just point out the fact that currently there is a cardinal.
I wasn't sure if you were going to say that.
There is a cardinal who is on trial for financial crimes in the Vatican right now.
Exactly.
There is a German synodal way that is basically leading the church in Germany into schism. There is an ongoing crisis of sexual abuse in the church.
The church is on fire.
This was the thing that we had to slam down.
Yeah.
And that's where I go, there's not a proportionality here.
No.
And that there's something wrong. I don't know why that happens, though. I don't know why it happens that way. This was not the thing that was causing the most problems in the life of the church.
No. And I know all of those things could be just cause for like, well, let me just leave,
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you do enter an examination of conscience, when you do enter into prayer, you realize like, no, Jesus, I want to be faithful to your bride, to you.
Yeah. And what do I often say to you?
You say a lot of things.
Comparison is the enemy of grace, right?
Oh,
and so if we compare this response to the response to other things in the life of the church, first of all, the traditional Latin Mass compared to a financial scandal is two very different things. And
two different playing fields.
Yeah, so trying to compare those two things isn't going to help.
Yeah.
So it doesn't do me any good to compare those things. I can say it like this is happening, but they're two different things.
Yeah.
So instead of getting into that comparison battle, we got to pray.
Right.
We got to pray.
But why? It's because I personally believe the Catholic Church is the true church that Jesus founded.
Right on.
Like it is the only thing that keeps me from going anywhere else. It's like, well, no, Jesus set it up and he's still been faithful and it's going to be. And
every problem in the life of the church we see comes from the people who make up the church.
The same way the Israelites kept messing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're still the same people.
As a human race, we're a mess.
Yeah.
But we have a savior and it's not me.
No.
And that's the good news.
Yeah. The good news is that it's Jesus. Cool.
Thanks, Paula.
Yeah, thanks, Father Sam. This is Roar Like the Lamb.
I'm Father Sam Pachuta.
And I'm Paola Pena.